without any further ado, I'd like to thank everyone who's on the call live, and for everyone who is listening afterwards. As you just heard, a couple people I know are not able to make it, but they are interested in listening to Michael talk a little later. So I will send that call out to all of you. So thank you, whether you're on the call live or not. And Michael, really excited to have you here. I'm glad you could join us. And I've known Michael for several years. He is a brilliant guy, fascinating. I've had many instances where I walk into the room and he's like, hey, what's going on? And next thing you know, we've had a 2-hour discussion that's gone from A to Z. And it always brings up new perspectives and things that I didn't know beforehand. And I've been aware of my Physicology program for a little bit. I've read through his ebook, which I would recommend everyone go to his website. I believe it's free. You can kind of put yourself through some of the questions that he asked you. And I got a lot of interesting thoughts out of it, and it's stuff that I wouldn't have known unless I had done the book. So I would encourage you all to do that. So I want to keep that intro kind of short and sweet and hand it over to Michael. And I'm really excited to hear what he's going to talk to us about.
Fantastic. Thank you, Shane. Really appreciate your invitation to be here. And I thought about it today with regards to what might be the best way to present my Physicology to the group and people that are listening. I want to first start by saying it's typically interactive, as my background is in the body and fitness and health and wellness in those ways. And so it came up organically through working with other people in a fitness way. Since we're talking, I think it's best what I do is just give you a background of myself, my personal experience, what were really the underpinnings which came through me, which became my Physicology, and we'll go from there, especially after going through the blog that was written about this and the example about the guy who basically froze himself to death out of his own fear. That's a great example. I'm going to just remove that and plug in myself and put that there, and we'll start with that. So there's a couple of things that are personal ideations that really impact the philosophy of my Physicology. One of them is that we're a spiritual being having a human experience, and a collective species first and an individual second. And the other thing is that we have consciousness a priori to the human experience. And what that really means with regards to what we're talking about and the way I'm using that is that we're creators. We come into life as creators, including the collaborations that we do with our parents. We stepped into the family. I look at things as an active participant in every eye blink of what we create in our human life. Since I write that the body is the non-conscious, that there really is no thinking that's non-conscious or beyond us, that's the body to me. And so that's the correlation that I would like everybody to at least go with me on, and we can talk about that a little bit later. So my personal experience, I would tell people I was born and it was instantly traumatic from there. I was ill as a child, put in an incubator, for in and out for most of my first year of life, prior to the time period where we realized that we need human touch to attach. So, my attachments were to an incubator. I was hit by a car, thrown out of a car, had my first sexual experience with grandma, was given my first drink, and then it was off to kindergarten. And so, I want to go over that because those are the underpinnings and the foundation for my life, right? So my father had cancer at the time. I didn't know what was happening. Memory doesn't come online till we're about 2.5 years old. And so everything was just downloaded into my body. Right. So my first experience with grandma, which is something that I want to talk about later on, without getting into the details, grandma told me she loved me. The experience that I actually had, I didn't know the difference. And so how I recorded that experience became love for me. Later on in my life, I realized that it was extreme physical excitement and shame and guilt. But my neurology and my process split off so that I could sustain the experience. Why that is important is because I didn't feel the experience, I just recorded it. When I had my first drink, my first day of kindergarten, my grandfather took me down to the fruit cellar in his farmhouse in the basement and pulled out a bottle of schnapps and told me I was the man of the family. And we had a little bit of schnapps and a beer before my breakfast. And he was the bus driver. And so that was important to me because these were loving experiences. Excuse me, or so I thought. What ended up happening is I took those experiences and really used it to, they impacted my life profoundly. There were so many traumas in my first 5 years of life that I had no idea that that's what they were, right? And so with regards to the emotional experience of it, I had no ability to do that. And so what it was just behavior for me. And I ended up existing in the one place left in the room that was reasonably comfortable for me, and that was happy, right? So you would think that sexual molestation, alcohol at 5 years old, hit by a car, and other traumatic affect, happy is not really the correct emotional response to have. And later in life, what ultimately happened is that turned into a defense. I was always happy no matter what under all circumstances because I had no ability to go into any other emotion besides that. If we scroll ahead, now I do want to interject all of this, how I see it is recorded and held in the body, which is our hard drive. And we develop a process or a cognitive behavioral way of being around these. Right? So I attached my emotional experience with my grandmother as loving because grandmas must love their grandkids, and that must be what I'm experiencing. So as I move forward in life later on, what started occurring was trauma recreation for me. My solution to everything was to behave sexually and to drink along with that. So if you put those two together moving forward into the late 60s and the early 70s, number one, I blended in with community, but number two, it was easy to get away with for a while. Of course, in my late teens and early 20s, I started bartending. And that was another place for me to fit in. We just did a documentary on the place that I bartended in Los Angeles 40 years later with regards to what that was like in Hollywood. And it's a piece, it's called Studio One Forever. If anybody wants to see it, it'll be coming out in the movies at some point. So what does this have to do with Physicology and how did I get to this point? Let's get into some of the things that will bring it a little bit more intensely. I ended up in my first rehab at 21 years old. I was diagnosed bipolar 1 with psychotic features. I had no clue really what was going on. I didn't know why my life was falling apart around me. And you know, under those circumstances, I could read in a book what bipolar was, but I had no ability to associate what that meant for me. It didn't make any sense. And so while I was in rehab, I took 2 magic markers and a calendar, blue for a good day, red for a bad day, and I started marking calendar days. Well, within about 6 months, I started having 25 good days in a row and 5 not so good days. And I just was browsing, I don't know, reading through some things. And I noticed one day I kind of fell into reading about the Big Bang Theory, expansion and consolidation, and photogenesis, how our cells recreate. And it was the first link that I had to bringing my experience to any sort of science connectivity and internal and external synchronicity, if you will. So I kept doing this for a while, and another thing started to occur to me, that the 25 to 5 was like the feminine system, you know, for females about a 5-day stretch. And, you know, I really had started to just slowly but surely discover more questions than any answers at the time. And this led me to wanting to learn about more about myself, right? And so I went into health and wellness. I started fitness training in 1975 at a place called Gold's Gym in Venice with some of the old dogs. The guy that trained me how to train, his name's Jim Morris. And he was one of the people that was in pumping iron, and I was his first floor monitor at Jim Morris Gym in Hollywood. And so, it was prior to fitness training in and of itself, but I really enjoyed what I was doing, and I enjoyed working with other people, in addition to starting to learn about myself and develop some strength around some of the circumstances that I was holding within me. That scroll ahead, I've done that for about 45 years, and that really became the foundation and the motivation for me to move further along. I had a really challenging dance with trying to get sober. It was very, very difficult for me. I didn't understand why I kept going back to what I was going back to. I didn't even really fully admit to the vulnerability of being molested when I was young, because I didn't really understand that that's what it was. So for anybody that's challenged in those ways of not having a clarity or thinking of themselves in a way that's less than strong, in the blog, we talked about it as the word weak. I like to look at things as holistic and in a survival way. So we survive in adapting to what our experiences are. And the neurological programming of that in our body and in our brain is such that that becomes our norm, and that becomes our truth until we reach conflict in our environment. Because with basic cognition, the cognitive actor does not grow until there's conflict in the environment. Well, my conflict was coming inside first. I could always feel it. And then my behavior seemed to skew from what my heart was telling me. I knew I was a good person. I knew I was a loving person. But what came out didn't seem to be loving. First to myself, and what I believe to be true is we can't give somebody something that we don't have. So if I don't have self-love, then what I'm giving you must be something different than that, right? And so in hindsight, I started putting some of this together with regards to, what might be going on for me. And this was a long and arduous journey with some of this. I want to scroll ahead a little bit because I don't want to get too caught in just my things, but these were some of the factors and the motivations from within that really gave me the drive to go back to school. First and foremost, all the letters behind my name, my bachelor, my master's, and my PhD, really, it took all of that just to get a beginning to understand myself, right? And so, I'm a person that I really needed to know, and I could feel that I hadn't reached the origin of myself. I really hadn't gotten back to the origin of what it was. As it turned out, the origin was an inability to be vulnerable. I've spent many years, 4 decades to be precise, in 12-step programs, which really we could look at it as cognitive behavioral and structural change. And that's where I first started learning about what vulnerability is, how allowing myself to listen to another person can impact me in a way that I can't take myself. In the rooms, they talk about, we can't keep it if we don't give it away, and we can't use the same head that got us drunk to get ourselves sober. That line right there is important, I believe, for those of us that have gone into the coaching field, because it's very, very important to create a distinction in my mind between where we end and our client or the person we're working with begins. What I have learned over this time with some of the traumas that I've had and the effect that's lasted for a long, long time is that it's about everything's co-created. And we are like an alchemical process between the two of us where you pour your ingredients into the center, I pour mine, and those chemicals of whatever combust into the creation of something new. And in this way, you've got space between so you can take what you need and leave the rest, and I have space between and I can take what I need and leave the rest. And it's always a teacher-student, student-teacher type of dynamics and relationship. The only way that I could coach you would be for you to teach me about you and your goals and areas that you see because you're the expert within yourself. You live in there. I don't. That's how I see a collective species first, that we're always a we first and that everything is always collaborative. You know, so what I had to do and what I had to take a look at is if that's true, you know, in the 4 decades that it took me to get to the place where I actually believe that, then I need to go back into all of my past and review it with that same philosophy rather than allowing myself to be a victim or an aggressor of any of my experiences. And what that required me to do was really do a clearing for myself. You know, and how do you do that? Well, you correct yourself when you're wrong. You make apologies to other people that you've hurt whenever possible. You abstain from doing that when it might be continually negative to another person. Self-recognition with regards to what you're talking about, whatever subject that may be, and you know, move forward and hopefully have a little bit of grace. You know, I liken our process to a cell phone. You know, our connection to the internet or collective consciousness, with, if you will. Our option is we have the ability to connect with 4 bars of Wi-Fi or 1 bar of Wi-Fi, or none for that matter. We can work offline, but then we can only work with the programming that's already downloaded on our cell phone. We can't upgrade and we can't interact. Right, so I believe the body works the same way neurologically, and our neurological system is the same as well.